cautious, but I could go ahead and introduce myself because I think I know me better than the video, right? Amen. Well, let me first start by saying I am Dr. Latazia Stewart. Most friends and family and those that I work along with refer to me as Dr. Taz. I'm not the Tasmanian devil, but they do call me Dr. Taz. And today it is such a pleasure and a privilege and an honor to once more be here with you in rainy Toronto. As my friend Lisa shared, when we were visiting in February, didn't know we were coming back, but I'm glad to be back. But it was snowing. It didn't snow any other day until the day we decided to get on the road. And in complete order, here we were again, here 2 days, no rain. And the moment we decide to get on the road this morning, there comes the showers that we say, showers of blessings that God sent to us today. And so once more, we're just so grateful for the privilege to be here to worship with you today. I'd like to bring you greetings from my home church in the Orlando area, Altamont Springs Seventh-day Adventist Church, where our pastor is Dr. Dion Henry. I also bring you greetings from way of some of my family members who I know is watching online in the Bahamas as well. I bring you greetings from them. And also my friends and my family, my immediate family, my husband and my children who are in the Orlando area. Mommy is coming back. Don't worry, I'm not going to stay in Canada, but I wanted to acknowledge them. My daughter, she's 10 years old, and for this past summer, while I was traveling and speaking in different locations, she was with me everywhere. She's not with me this morning. As you can imagine, she's like, Mommy, when am I going to go with you to Canada? I said, well, I didn't plan on this trip, so you never know what God may have in plan for the next one. And so hopefully when I make that return, she will be with me in short order. Can I tell you, friends, before I get started, that you have a pastor who's very courageous? You have a pastor who is very courageous, because this particular topic that we are going to be addressing today is not one that many churches are fond of. So your pastor is very courageous to have this particular topic addressed from the pulpit. And as I shared back in February, there are many churches that remain silent on this taboo topic. And for many reasons. Some may not just consider it to be a priority, but I challenge that mindset today. You see, I recall having a conversation with somebody at another church, we won't name the church, where they actually wanted me to be one of their speakers. And they spoke with their women's ministry leader regarding having me come as an invited guest. Their women's ministry leader responded to them in writing, "That's not a problem here at our church." You see, this is a very young, vibrant church, and there are many families that have children. I dare say I wish that was the only time. Like I tell you, you have a courageous pastor. There was another church I was visiting earlier this summer, and let me tell you, church folks, y'all friendly. I consider being friendly. I used to be a greet at mine. And one of the ladies who was in the foyer, when she became aware of the topic that I was going to be sharing on, again, she shared, "That's an interesting topic, but I don't think that's a problem here." Can I share with you some statistics, my friends? According to the World Health Organization, okay, talking about the world here. When I came here in February, we were looking at 1 in 8 individuals who experience infertility. In April, that number was updated to 1 in 6 persons globally. I looked up some data here in Canada. It corresponds with the world statistics. And as it relates to pregnancy loss, we're talking about 1 in 4. So while it may be a silent issue that is not discussed very frequently, it is a very prevalent issue that is among our seats in each church, each community. And so I ask that you indulge me just for a few moments today as I get into this conversation with you. And now we invite God to just be with us as I say a word of prayer. Lord, make me a servant, humble and meek. Lord, let me lift up those who are weak. And may the prayer of my heart always be, make me a servant, Lord. Make me your servant today. Through this journey, I have come to learn that God loves to respond to faith. I've come to know that God responds to our tested faith, and sometimes he does this through a delivery of a delayed promise. Not delayed by his standards, but delayed by ours. Because God never delays what he has timed purposely for a specific point in our lives. That comes from chapter 8 of my book, The Secrets of Faith in Fertility, on page 66. And I'm going to grab a copy of it here just so that I can have it as I reference some parts of it today. In Matthew chapter 14, and go ahead, we're going to be in the Word today. In Matthew chapter 14, most of us are familiar with the passage on the story where Jesus feeds the 5,000. Anybody heard that story before? Anybody heard that story? And I know that as we reference that story talking about 5,000, it said 5,000 men. So imagine, not counting the children and the women, that number probably was in excess of 5,000 that Jesus fed. Now, before we dive a bit deeper into this passage, you may begin to scratch your head and wonder, well, goodness, Dr. Taz, I thought we were talking about breaking the silence of infertility and pregnancy loss. Like, how does feeding the 5,000 come into this equation? Well, in full transparency, God did bring this passage to me several weeks ago. And I had no idea. I really didn't. I had no idea of how he was going to use this particular story. But stick with me, stay awake, okay? Y'all don't go to sleep on me. Those of you online, don't be switching the channel on YouTube to see what's the next sermon out there. Let's stay in the Word together, okay? I'd like to start with the end in mind as we look at this passage in chapter 14. And it tells us, in verse 20, go to verse 20, it says, they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The evidence is here, my friends, that when God blesses, in his time, not ours, in his time, he does so in abundance that you in turn are able to bless others, even when you are not able to see it in the beginning. So let's go to verse 15, all right, where it says that as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, there is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away, Lord, so we can go to the village, so they can go to the village and buy themselves some food. You know, there are always going to be naysayers who are only going to see the negative in any situation. All right? They are unable to see that God still performs miracles and still has the capacity to bless exceedingly abundantly beyond what they can think or imagine. So what did Jesus say in response? If you're following along, he said, they do not need to go anywhere. You give them something to eat. He said, you give them something to eat. Now, could you imagine you being one of the disciples, you don't have nothing, and Jesus telling you, you give them something to eat? You hungry too? Like, God, how is this supposed to work? And then one of them say, you know what? Look at it. Lord, as I see, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. We only have. How many of you look at what you only have? Anybody looked in there when they're in the gas stations be like, Lord, I only got $5 to put gas in this car today to get home. How I can get where I'm going? Anybody had that situation of happen to them before? Or maybe it's time to send the kids off to school and you're like, Lord, I only have, I know it's back to school time. I'm like one of those parents looking at, Lord, I only have. Anybody here looking at their only? But can I tell you that the God we serve specializes in the only? I love Jesus' response to them. And if you take a look at verse 18, he says, come here. Come here, honey. Come here. Bring them to me. Bring them here to me. Is God asking you to bring your only this morning? Is he asking you to bring your doctor's diagnosis to him this morning? Is he asking you to bring your broken heart this morning? Is he asking you to bring that wayward child this morning? Is he asking you to bring your infertility issues this morning? Is he asking you to bring the pain, the loss of another child that you were carrying, that you perceive to be your miracle? Is he asking you to bring it to him this morning? You know, when I look back over the story of my life that I've been led by God to capture in this book, can I tell you that as I experienced many setbacks and challenges regarding my fertility, I am still sometimes in awe at how naive I was when I first got married. You see, I come from a pretty large family. I got cousins out the wazoo, as we would say in the Bahamas. I got cousins from cousins. All my aunts and uncles with kids. And then I have cousins who having their own kids. Not to mention my best friends who got married with me the very same year I got married were all having kids. So, Lord, I clearly am going to have the opportunity to have kids too, right? That was my natural assumption. I never envisioned that it would be a problem. I never realized at that time that normalizing what everybody had and experienced and the way they were was not going to be my normal situation. I didn't realize, or I thought at the moment, that I was the only one. You see, we have normalized the expectation of what we believe things should be and how they should go, and we dismiss that not everyone, especially in church, we dismiss the fact that not everyone checks the box. the seam box. Insert God's plan. Many years ago, before I began to experience fertility challenges, God had given me a vision near the ocean that I would be a mother. And I go into detail about that in this book. You see, I saw myself with children as I was looking out into the sky. And God knows that when my fertility challenges of fibroids, endometritis, scar tissue, and the list goes on, my faith and memory of that vision did begin to fade. But God. You see, God is telling us when we experience these challenges, it may be so different from that of others. He still wants us to bring them to Him. But you may be saying, God, I only have one ovary. I only have 3 more years before I turn 40. The odds decrease for me to have a child because I only have this situation going on. But can I tell you, even when you tell God, I only have faith the size of a mustard seed, He is able to take that and expand upon that and have Him alone receive the glory for what He is able to do in your life. You see, again, God says, bring your only to Him, your limited resources, your meager knowledge, your meager abilities, all right? Bring them to me. And notice, when you tell somebody bring is a command. It's a command. And this kind of instruction that comes from God requires us to be obedient. Then in verse 19, He directed the people to sit on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and looking up to heaven, He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then He gave them to His disciples to give to the people. Church family, God is giving you an assignment. He's wanting you to be the ones to let others know there is hope, even in the midst of their dark situation. He directs the people to sit down. You see, in our purpose and also service to others, God is already directing the hearts of people He's preparing for us to reach who is suffering with infertility and pregnancy losses, here within the church and within our community and even around the world. For those who may be suffering silently, like I did, because even though you were not able to hear it on the video, there were many years that many individuals did not know this was my personal struggle. They became aware that I did have a pregnancy loss, my first one, because I was visibly pregnant. And many began to pray that when I become pregnant again, I would have a safe and healthy pregnancy. But what they did not know was that I actually needed them to even pray for me to first get pregnant. This was the level of shame that I lived under. As the conversation that we're having today was not in any of my churches. It was not even in my family. And it was definitely not even among my friends at the time. And so I was buried under with shame and isolation. There may be some of you today who are watching online and or maybe sitting in the pews who are struggling with similar challenges. But again, I'm telling you, God is saying, bring them to me. And so we see that God, Jesus, as he stood there on the mount, gave thanks for those little bit of food, that little bit of food he had in his hand, and then he broke it and gave it to the people, the disciples, to share out. You see, God can take those small resources that you have, that little knowledge that you have, your little fertility situation, and I'm going to call it little because God is so much bigger than that. And he's telling you, give thanks. What? For my problems? In the midst of my pain? While I'm waiting on my promise? Give thanks, God? Some may think that prayer that day in the front of those folks who were fed was just a ritual prayer of thanks for the food. You know, like when we sit before our meal, we say, thank you, Jesus, for the meal. May it strengthen and nourish our bodies and do it well. But I believe that prayer that day was so much more, because Jesus is here setting the example that we are to give thanks before the blessings of abundance as he breaks the loaves, as he breaks your situation up and you look at it with your natural eyes in despair. God is saying, give thanks. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The broken pieces were eaten by everyone. Everyone had something to eat. And they were all satisfied. You see, when we look at our lives, we look at those broken issues that we have, and we're like, how am I ever going to get over? But can I tell you, just like in this parable that was shared, God is now able to use those broken pieces to now continuously share in abundance to others, to be satisfied even beyond you. So globally, there is a need for us to serve those who are struggling with infertility and losses. God knows what we have, and he's waiting for us to bring our only to him. But maybe, if you're one like me, who is saying to God, I only have mustard seed faith, Lord, what could you do with that? Let me tell you that he has the ability to bless, this faith and use your faith for his glory. He knows that your faith may be fading because of all of the pain that you have. He is able to use your pain just like the oil in the alabaster box. He knows your heart, and he is able. He's asking you to bring your fibroids, bring your PCOS, bring your scar tissue, bring your endometriosis, bring all your fertility challenges, even the ones that are unknown to the doctors. And he wants to wrap his arms of love and hope around you to remind you that you are not forgotten. He wants to remind you that in the midst of your journey, in the midst of your pain, pour your faith. Pour your faith in his hands, just like the oil was poured from the alabaster